Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nugentino Cinema. I'm back again today, joined by Kay. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And we're here today to review Satoshi Kon. I think it's how I'm saying his name correctly, maybe. Um, Review his film Perfect Blue. I think it's from 1997. And yeah, so I'd never seen this film before. I haven't seen that many anime films in general. I've seen a few, like I've seen like Akira. And I've seen like Studio Ghibli stuff, some of it, but do you want to just set up like your background with this film or why you were interested in it or have interest in it?
Yeah, of course. So I've heard it always as Satoshi Kon, but I don't really know what's right either. So the audience, I'm sure, will inform us. But yeah, I kind of grew up on animation, and of course, with Japan being a huge producer of animation, I had heard his name thrown around like in my teenage years and early 20s, but had never really looked into his films that much. Um, for whatever reason, I don't know that there's anything specific. I just didn't get to it. And then he has a couple of other, well, he has made a few films, and I'd seen a couple others. I'd seen Paprika and I'd seen Millennium Actress. Um, and so it was kind of just one where I was like, I should really see Perfect Blue. And it's now easily my favorite film that he's made. Paprika and Millennium Actress are uh, widely hailed as being terrific as well, but I feel like there's something about Perfect Blue that just stands apart. And I think it's even like in the top 50 narrative features on Letterboxd. So I'm not the only one who feels this way.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess just kind of generally hearing about him until I finally made the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I know I had seen that it was in like the like high up on the letterbox list, and I definitely heard of it before, like referenced as like a great film, and I'd always, had interest in it. So I'm glad I got to watch it. Um
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting. I was kind of reading through the background of the film. Um, I saw that it was like produced originally as like kind of like a direct to video type thing,
Hmm.
and it like only later was picked up by like film festivals and kind of got treated like a real film, but like they didn't
Interesting.
expect it to really have any market outside of like direct to video in Japan. So I thought that was interesting.
I didn't know any of that. Yeah, I just always knew of him as I had been under the assumption that this was like, let's get this international baby. Like I had no idea that it was an uphill battle for it to even get released. So
Yeah.
that's funny. Yeah, a little bit of trivia for me there. Thanks.
So do you want to give some of your thoughts, just like on your just general opinions on the film?
Yeah, so this was my fourth official time. This is my fourth time logging it on Letterboxd, so we'll say
Mhm.
that. I feel like I had seen it before I joined Letterboxd, but I honestly don't recall. So I've seen it at least four times, we'll say. And yeah, it's one where I remember the first time I saw it. I was quite a bit younger and hadn't seen as many films, and so I didn't have I basically kind of like took it all at face value and therefore like struggled a little bit to understand what the film was trying to do or what even happened. So the first time I watched the film, I actually was kind of lukewarm on it. I was like a little bit confused. I had to kind of like spend some time thinking about what even happened, and eventually I was just like, I don't get it, but it looks nice. And then the second time I watched it, I was like, oh, this makes a little bit more sense. And then recently, I'd rewatched this just back in June, actually. Um, or yeah, June, early June. So it was just recently. And then you asked if we could do an animation review, and I think that's so terrific. I'm really glad you asked. So I rewatched it, and so it's kind of one of those where like this watch for me, I say all of that to preface that like this watch for me, I feel like I don't know, it I wasn't as preoccupied with trying to figure out what was going on, so I was really able to just like enjoy the animation and the story, and like I knew everything that was going to happen, so I spent a little bit more time thinking about just like kind of different things he was trying to do with like symbolism and things he was trying to say. So I had a really good watch, and I even watched Black Swan. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I even watched Black Swan after rewatching this last night. I did a double feature of it because I hear that this film is compared to Black Swan a lot. And we can get into that a little bit later because I didn't really like Black Swan at all upon a rewatch. And so part of me like begrudges that a little bit that these are tied together so closely in some people's minds, but teach their own. So I don't know. I feel like it's one of those films where just in general, I understand that it's one that maybe won't click with everybody right away, but if you give it a little bit of time, or honestly just like look up with a Wikipedia or something after, the film does a lot and it's really, really a worthwhile watch. So yeah, that's kind of a long short of it.
Yeah, definitely. I thought it was a good watch. I definitely didn't understand everything on the first viewing, but I feel like I got like a decent grasp of it. Kind of reminded me of I mean, I've heard it compared to Hitchcock. I've heard it compared to stuff like that, like Vertigo, or but like I could also get like a De Palma vibe, kind of like Dress to Kill or something like that. Um, I think the most reminded me of like something like kind of Lynchian, Mulholland Drive or something like that. I was thought it was reminiscent, and also some like just giallo stuff. It reminded me of. It kind of had a giallo vibe to me, just a little bit. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I some of the surreal stuff that happens towards the end, I thought was good, and a lot of that is just kind of like I like psychological like thrillers, and I like it when they mess with like what is going on within the mind or like different perspectives and stuff. So yeah, I enjoyed all of that stuff.
Yeah, so I guess for anybody who hasn't seen the film, first of all, make some time for it. Second, the reason it's compared to Black Swan a lot, and just kind of like a brief synopsis of it, is that it's this pop idol, and I think they say that she's like 21, so she's a young pop idol, and she's making a transition in her career into acting. So she's moving from being like record hits to trying to transition her fan base to a different medium. And in doing that, she gets some backlash from her fans. And as she continues to progress with this new career path, um, those fans become increasingly violent and people start to die. And it becomes this mind bending psychological thriller where, like, her personality, she is like struggling with like an identity crisis of what she's doing, which is also um, made much more difficult by
Mm-hmm.
the violence happening around her. So yeah, it starts off pretty like a basic anime. It's almost like a little bit cheesy with like dancing and like J-pop music. But then
Like
I
Power
think it's
Rangers in the
within,
beginning.
yeah, the beginning would probably turn most people off who go into it thinking it's going to be just another like anime movie. And it's not that at all. It's so complex and dark and it does a lot. Um, but yeah, it kind of sets it up there. And then within maybe the first 15 or 20 minutes, it takes a very sinister turn. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then as you mentioned, by the end, it's just it's hard to know left from right, up from down, and it has some really interesting. The narrative moves in some really interesting ways. So, yeah, just to kind of give a filler, I would hope that most people have already seen this, but
Yeah.
there's always a few who have been sleeping on it. Tisk tisk.
Yeah, I think it's one of the better ones I've seen. I mean, I definitely need to see way more. I'd like to see Paprika as well, and that seems interesting. It's funny comparing this to Black Swan. I've heard Paprika compared to Inception, so I think that's interesting. But
Yeah, and just like on that, I would say even earlier when you were giving like references to Hitchcock and Lynch and stuff, like these are relatively loose comparisons to me at least, because it's very like while it steals some, you know, some elements. It's very much its own film. I never felt that it was trying to emulate something else or pull too much from other things. It feels very much like an original narrative and like an original creation. And I think that because there's little like it, and maybe animation isn't as prominent of a genre for some people. It gets compared to things like that a lot. But I would say, like, go into it not expecting Vertigo or Mulholland Drive and just kind of like let yourself have it. Or Black Swan. Wow, I'm like already blocking that movie out of my mind. There's like a mind barrier there. Where it's like, what movie? I've never seen this movie before. Anyway, sorry. I just wanted to put that out there because I just feel like sometimes advocating for animated films can be difficult. And I feel like maybe people assume that they're just like a reproduction of narratives that already exist, but just in animated form. And that's not the case. Like, this is a very unique story, or maybe not extremely unique, but it's a very original story.
Mhm. And I'm not necessarily saying that I think it's like trying to be like those or like emulating them.
Oh,
I
sure.
just it was like it's something that it reminds me of. So it sort of reminds me of something like if a live action movie was to have a certain tone or style, like fitting into a genre. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't mean to disregard that. I more just mean to like preface if somebody hasn't seen this and isn't super familiar with with animated films, um, just to like hopefully try to create the environment of seeing it as a singular thing rather than as wholly responsive to something that already exists.
Hmm.
But I think the relations you made are true and like very accurate. I'm definitely a Lynch head myself, so anytime something can bring up Mulholland Drive or any of his other movies, I'm a happy gal. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. And I think another reason this gets compared to Black Swan is well, there's obviously some similarities, but I think Darren Aronofsky was like a big fan of Satoshi Kon,
Huh.
and I think he at one point like wanted to remake this movie. And was trying to get the rights to it, but
I'm
that
kind of
didn't.
glad.
Yeah, that didn't happen. Um, but what was I gonna say? Yeah, I thought this movie was like sort of like even though it's like sort of like really surreal and like out there, I thought it was like more grounded in a way than a lot of the anime I've seen. Maybe outside of some Ghibli stuff. But like comparing it to like something like Akira, like I thought it reminded me more of something in the style of like films I've seen, or I don't know how to really exactly describe that, but just not like crazy action scenes and I don't know what I'm trying to say exactly, but I just it reminded me of yeah, I thought it fit well into some of the stuff I was comparing it to, like De Palma or Lynch or whoever. But it is its own thing for sure, still. And I thought, I mean, it's got a unique take on it, and I really like whenever Mima, I think is her name, like as the idol, you'll see her like jumping around like on the street lights. Uh, I thought those parts were cool.
Yeah, yeah, and oh man, I had something to say and I lost my train of thought. Um, Oh yeah, in terms of comparing it to other animated films, we've had conversations about animated films a lot outside of these conversations. So, but just kind of like touching on that a little bit, like I feel that animation is kind of often seen as like more narrow than it is, and so it's like an animated films contain like every genre, every style, like obviously it's all going to be animated, but it contains like a huge multitude of cinema. And so while a lot of popular anime that comes over to, or animated films, because I feel like there's a difference between an animated film and anime per se, like Hayao Miyazaki actually says he doesn't like anime. So I kind of like separate those things. So like
Well,
there's
I
different.
often question even to call Ghibli movies anime, but yeah,
Right. Yeah, there's different characterizations and categories, genres, subgenres. So I think a lot of what filters through to mainstream American audiences is going to be a lot more of like the high octane, punchy action stuff, like obviously Akira is highly acclaimed. And then a lot of like anime series that make it over are more like that, or you got like a lot of slice of life type stuff. And that's actually part of what makes this film so special is that it's so outside of kind of what most people would expect from an animated film um, in mainstream American culture that I think it kind of took people a little bit by surprise. But yeah, so while it is, a thriller, a psychological thriller, and it has all of these like different elements, like yeah, I wouldn't ever necessarily compare it to something like Akira, aside from the fact that they're both Japanese animated films, because they're doing such different things in like such different areas of film. And so it's like it's kind of tricky because I feel like when you talk about films, like when talking about animated films, there tends to be more narrow preconceptions of what that means. So hopefully people will experience films like Perfect Blue more often, and it'll encourage them to watch more animated stuff because there's just a huge like ocean of things waiting to be discovered. It's not all just like big swords and blood splatter, however cool that stuff is, and it's very cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, what were some of your favorite like scenes in this movie, or like why do you like connect to it? I guess.
Yeah, so this film has some really beautiful visuals. I mean, it's gorgeously animated from start to finish, especially when you're considering like 90s animation. It holds up so well. There isn't really like any I don't think that they were really doing a lot of CG, or maybe they were. I shouldn't say. There's
I only
not.
noticed like there's like certain scenes where it like pan out of her window and you would see the city, and the city
Right.
looked kind of CG to me, and you'd be like outside the train, and there's some stuff like that. But other than that, I'm not sure. But I noticed some possible CG when I in the city.
Yeah, I should have looked this up before to see if it was all hand animated or not, but since I'm not sure, I will say prioritizes hand drawn animation, and if it ends up being entirely hand drawn, that's still true.
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, so I think that just having that style of animation has helped it retain like a lot of longevity and rewatchability because it doesn't feel aged. I mean, there are elements of it like different technology things like when she's learning to use a computer where it does date it, but overall I feel like it's just as impactful. It would be just as impactful if it was released today as it was then, because it does so much in terms of commenting on um, showbiz, um, but and how it really affects individuals. And so it really kind of takes this personal approach to deconstructing the way that like stardom affects people, and that's part of why it's related to films like Black Swan. I didn't forget it this time. Black Swan, because it's this a story of a woman who is put under extreme pressure to perform, and the people around her understand what she's going through but also continue to push her. So it's like very isolating, and it's very it creates this like very jarring contrast between having the world love you and having nobody there really advocating for you. And so it does a lot in terms of like dealing with that on the surface of just like stardom, and then it gets into her personal experiences. And so like as a young woman, a young woman in this position, like you see her dealing with the things that women are women have to deal with when they're in these kinds of professions. So I mean, we'll get into it a little bit later, but for me, more than any specific scene or beautiful animation or anything, it's the substance and core of the story and what it's really trying to say. And I think it does deal with these women's issues in a very empathetic and but precise way, where it's not shying away from everything, but it also portrays things in a way where, yeah, like I said, it's very empathetic. You don't feel. Oh, sorry, there's fireworks going on outside because it's 4th of July weekend. So if you guys hear something in the background, that just startled me. I'm sorry. And I lost my train of thought. But yeah, I think more than any specific moment in the film, it's just the overall themes, what it tries to tackle, and the fact that it accomplishes what it sets out to do with that in such a way that has created, it's a masterpiece, and a lot of people agree. And so I think that whether you look at it from a macro or micro perspective in terms of the story, there's something for everybody to gain something from, whether it's relating to it or just having a new way of understanding other people's experiences. And for that to be accomplished through an animated film, I think is like especially, it's very special. It's not escapism. It uses animation to deal with things that perhaps would be difficult to piece apart through something live action, because it really gets into her head. So that's a long answer.
Yeah, for sure.
But what stood out? Sorry.
I was just gonna say I agree. Like, I think it's the themes are handled really well. I was surprised at some of the violence. Like, I wasn't expecting it to
Hmm,
be as like graphic as it is at some points, um, but I thought it
why is
like
that?
handled. It created a good unease. Um, I think throughout the film, and I
Hmm.
wasn't. I wasn't maybe where it starts to get like sort of weird for me is like towards the end. And I think I well, actually, I didn't fully understand this part. I had to like read about it on Wikipedia. But like when it's like revealed like that like her manager or agent or whatever was like doing a lot of the killings, and I guess they're like suffering like some shared delusion. Like I was like in the Wikipedia, it was saying that they had like folie à deux, which is like two people connected like suffering under the same psychosis. Um, so I didn't fully grasp that on a first time watch, but it would be interesting to watch it again.
Yeah, like I said, it is. There are a lot of moving parts in the film, and there are multiple instances of kind of like red herrings, or it really will like lead you to the point where I remember the first time I watched it, I was like, oh, this is definitely the answer. This is how it's going to shake out in the end. And then it's like, nope. And yeah, you kind of touched on one of the twists just now, but it's 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 so well done too, because it's not just like a crime thriller of like somebody gets killed and a whodunit kind of thing. There are there are multiple layers of it that she's having to deal with. So, like in the beginning, they introduce a stalker character who's like an obsessed fan. They go to like all of her shows and like have a camcorder, and like they're in places where they really shouldn't be, like professional environments where like they shouldn't have clearance, but like this person gets in anyway. Um, and then they find out that there's like a website called Nima's Room, and it's like somebody writing fake diary entries about her down, and it's like detailed down to like what foot she uses to step off the train and what brand of milk she likes. And so it's like she's slowly, almost like Alice down the rabbit hole, slowly realizing all of these things that she never saw before. Because when she's first introduced in the film, she's just like this bubbly pop idol who's a member, like the third member of this band Cham, with her two other um, bandmates, and she's very kind of like separated from reality in the way that you would be without the internet at that time. She doesn't really understand like the severity of certain things happening around her. And so when she starts to kind of discover that like she has a stalker, that like the level of stalking, and then the murders start to happen and like all of these violent things. So it really starts to unravel. And so while it is like there is like the cool murder mystery shock thing of like finding out who has been perpetrating the murders at the end, there's so much more interest in the film because of all of the other elements. So like they are interwoven and they come to like a very satisfying conclusion at the end where you're like, oh, this is what happened. If you've seen it before, you read the Wikipedia, you know, like as we mentioned, it may not come together clearly the first time. But I think that's part of what makes it such an intriguing story too, is that it's not just trying to do one thing, it's commenting on multiple things at the same time and then like how they come together.
Yeah, yeah, I think it was really well done, and I'd definitely be curious to watch it again. So I'm just looking at some of my notes, but
Yeah.
um, well, I wanted to ask you. This is sort of just like a general thing, but like, what are your like maybe like top three favorite like anime films?
Oh, sure. So I mean, this is one. um Other top animated films, I mean, Akira's been thrown around in discussion lately, so I'll go with that one just because it is so good. It's an easy pick, but it is so good. Excuse me, I had a hiccup there. Um, a third one that's kind of tricky. Maybe The Tale of Princess Kaguya. That was like one of the last fully hand-drawn films to come out of Japan, and surprisingly the most expensive. It cost $50 million to make that film because it's all hand drawn. So those are three, I suppose, that I would definitely recommend to people who haven't seen them. But yeah, absolutely check out Perfect Blue first, especially if you're not super familiar with animated films and maybe you're a little like they're for kids. Like this, I think will very much show otherwise.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's very dark. It's thematically dark. Um, yeah, I mean there are some other like great points to touch on there, but do you have favorite animated films?
um, well, I'm trying to think of some of my favorites that are like outside the norm. Um, like I really like "It's Such a Beautiful Day" by Don Hertzfeldt.
Oh yeah, that's
I
a
thought,
good one.
yeah, I really like that film. I mean, there's my favorite, like I like Fantastic Mr. Fox and stuff like that. But
Oh yeah, those are great.
yeah, and Apollo. Well, maybe this wouldn't be like super high up in my favorites, but like Apollo 10 and a half, like Richard
Yeah,
Linklater.
Linklater's rotoscoping animation films are great. Waking Life is terrific. Yeah, Fantastic Mr. Fox is good. I mean, there are a bunch of animated films that I really like. I guess when I was answering, I was thinking more like Japanese animation.
Well,
Um,
I would get my favorite of those, and that's what I meant for you. But like, I haven't seen enough to really comment
oh,
on my
sure, yeah,
favorite like anime films. It's really just like Akira, um, this, and I like this more than Akira. I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, I've seen like My Neighbor Totoro and Spirited Away. I probably like My Neighbor Totoro a little bit more than this, but like it kind of feels like apples and oranges, like two very different things.
yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, My Neighbor Totoro will be up there for me in my favorites. Just talking about like general animated films, like I really like Anomalisa. I think it's a great one.
yeah. That is a really good one. I should rewatch that.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I guess I'm curious though on Perfect Blue, like a little bit more of what you thought. I mean, especially since you haven't seen a lot of Japanese animated films, is it about what you expected? Is it very different from what you expected? Were there moments that stood out or surprised you?
Well, I mean, it was about in line with what I expected. Like I guess, like I said, like it's like in comparing it to something like Akira, which I'm not trying to compare them directly because they're very different. but like just a lot of the anime stuff I've seen has been like kind of action oriented, and so I thought like it was interesting or cool to see a movie like this that's sort of surreal, like it's grounded but surreal. Like it's a straightforward. I don't know how to mean straightforward, but like it's a story like outside of the action like elements. So I thought that was good, but like I liked some of the surrealism that like because I really like a lot of surreal films like stuff by Lynch and stuff like that. But I thought it had a unique take on that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, I just thought. I mean, a lot of it's hard to grasp on a first time watch, but I thought the themes of like sort of like you know how she's being affected by the industry were done well, and how she's being affected by everything around her and these fans and stuff like that. Like I thought it was well done, but I would definitely like to see it again. I mean, it's probably like outside of My Neighbor Totoro, but like I said, very different films. But outside of that, it's probably like I mean the best like anime film I've seen. So
I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, it does a lot of interesting things in terms of stepping outside of what perhaps would be oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Expected, I suppose, of films like this. I mean, I was thinking about this in terms of films in general too. When I was watching Black Swan and how different those are, because while the plight of the protagonist may have some similarities, especially visually with the way that like their perception of themselves kind of breaks into two. And those are portrayed very differently as kind of having a light and dark side in both films. Um, what Black Swan does is very much more like this woman undergoing suffering imposed by herself, but also by her peers to varying degrees, and a heightened sexual element to all of it. And she's kind of suffering through all of this in order to become perfect. And at the end, after sacrificing everything she has, including her own life, to give the performance that the I don't know what the choreographer, that's not his name, the director of the ballet. I don't know if that's the correct like way to refer to him, but the guy,
yeah,
like as soon as he deems it as being perfect and she's perfect, like she ascends and dies and like that's her story. The whole story of Black Swan is just a woman suffering for perfection, essentially. Um, and in Perfect Blue, while there are a lot of carryovers that I mentioned, it's an entirely different narrative. And it's much more about suffering these experiences. But the in Black Swan, she's just so devoid of identity aside from this thing, and in Perfect Blue she's very much her own person who's having to go through these things. So like for
well in
example,
this, or sorry to interrupt you, but in this like it feels like she's kind of taking the power back as opposed to Black Swan.
a little bit, yeah, like especially there are some moments like in the last maybe 30 minutes that are like very visceral. Like she starts kind of hallucinating, like she doesn't know what is a dream and what's not. And, you know, she'll wake up and find like bloody clothes in the closet and not really understand what happened. And so I think like what first came to mind when you mentioned that is like the moment of catharsis where she has the dream of killing one of the people. But to tie that back through is like what's so different about Perfect Blue is like, yeah, she's her own person having to go through these things, but also the sexual element of it is handled so differently. Um, so, like, I mean, this review wasn't meant to be a comparison of Black Swan and Perfect Blue, but I just feel like it's a much more commonly seen film that people will have a point of reference for. And so maybe that can help. But I also am just being honest, trying to like create a disassociation between the two because I don't think that it's fair to compare them so directly all the time. Um, but like for example, in Perfect Blue, she very early on, almost immediately into transitioning into acting, is told that she is going to do a rape scene, and it's really one of the bigger breaking points in her psyche that differentiates her from the person that she perceived herself as to this like new version of herself. And it deals with like a lot of the like shame and anxiety and pressure. So it's like in the moment she's like, oh, I will do this. I want to be an actress. I want to be taken seriously. And so it's this really strong commentary on the fact that this industry, like the people in the room know she doesn't feel comfortable with this. There is someone there advocating for her, but she eventually is just like, I will do this. I want to be taken seriously. I want to be in this line of work. And it's such a reflection of the way that these professions that women, it's such a reflection of the experiences women have in these professions. I mean, most obviously like the Me Too movement and everything, where it's just like, if you want to work in this industry, you've got to, be willing to do things you maybe wouldn't want to do otherwise, whether it's on screen or off. Um, and so she like goes through and does this rape scene, and even just the way that that's handled in the film is like so, it's extremely visceral, and it's hard to watch even as an animated film. But then even in that, he interjects this moment where they are shifting to like reset the take and get another angle, and she has the guy's face like right there, and he's like, I'm sorry, and she's like, it's okay. And then they go into like the full rape scene, and so it's like, even in that, he is very specifically humanizing it. Like it's not supposed to be erotic in any way. In fact, it's like very anti-erotic, and you really feel for her. Whereas in Black Swan, it's like very aggressively sexual, and like everybody in the film is trying to get her like in bed because they think that it will better her, and she's constantly being compared to like a more open liberal woman, like this is who you should be, this is what we want from you, you're not perfect unless you're like this kind of person. And so it's like a very different psychological approach to what these women are going through. And I say that because I think it speaks so much to like what a wonderful film Perfect Blue is, that it handles these things in a way that's actually insightful, empathetic, and progressive, where you can watch this and like it's impossible not to feel for her. And then afterward too, there's the scene where in Perfect Blue she goes back home and she like has a breakdown. She like smashes her stuff and like breaks down crying on her bed because she didn't want to do it, but she felt like she had to. And I feel like it's so much of that in the film that makes it so impactful for me, and so different from perhaps what we would expect from these kinds of films in general, especially in the 90s, to have a film like this, but also from like animated films, because like we mentioned, a lot of what filtered through was very much not like this. So it makes it so special. And I mean, there are a lot of other moments in the film like that too, but that's one that I think about a lot as a way of doing scenes like that without it being without it being taking advantage of anybody. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, for sure.
That was a bit of a tangent, but
Oh no, yeah, it reminds me a little bit of like what Roger Ebert talking about, like his favorite thing about movies in general, and that it's that they can be like empathy machines. Like you can take people from any sort of background and put them into another person's experience. So yeah, I think that's like a great thing about movies in general.
yeah, and what I love about Perfect Blue too is how excuse me, how each character is like given some humanity. Like even the people that are causing harm, we see them still as people. Like they're introduced as individuals, feeling individuals first. And so you understand their motives before everything kind of gets haywire. And I think that's part of what makes it such a compelling story too. Is it's not just some masked villain swooping in and out with a knife. It's like very grounded. So, excuse me. So with like spoilers kind of already introduced and everything, her stalker, well, I'll start there. Her stalker who's introduced at the beginning, like we see him as this kind of like he's purposefully drawn in a way that um is very different from the way the other characters are drawn. He's given very different facial features, which we can perceive to be really, anything like quote ugly. I don't really feel like that's a fair way to describe it, but just very different. Like he's kind of given this outsider appearance, and people are like kind of shunned and put off by him. But then you get like these other moments with him later on, like when he's in his room and you see that like his room is like covered in Mima stuff, but like it's what he has, it's like what he really cares about, and this is like how he has like a bond with the world, and like it's through this person, but he was never actually doing any harm. Like he was obsessed and maybe like should have taken some space back, but he only ever wanted to like help her. And it was Mima's manager who saw that and weaponized it, where she was like, you have to do these things to save Mima. And it was only then that he kind of like started to do things that were essentially we're supposed to understand as like outside of his character, to the point where he doesn't even accomplish them. Like he doesn't do. I think he was the one who was maybe responsible for attempting one of the murders. I don't know if it was like the letter bomb or something, but it's mentioned later that like he didn't even do what he didn't manage to like kill somebody. And so she had to step in, the manager had to step in and say, well, if I can't get somebody else to do this, I guess I'll do it myself. But even with her motivation is so driven by, well, it's her own obsession too, and her own disassociation with her life and wanting to be somebody else. And there's that whole layer of it too, just wanting to like embody a different personality or persona, that we haven't even touched on. But like in this, it's just like she's trying to, maybe trying to protect Mima, but it's taken out of control. She's basically trying to like retain her in this certain form. And I think it's so interesting too that like the character is a woman doing this. Not in the sense that like it never happens either way, but just like I thought that was very kind of a thoughtful and interesting way of approaching it, because it's like she's made out to be this like very safe, almost like mothering person. Like she drives her around, she's like, I've got you, she's always there, and she's made to feel like very safe. But then we find out that like all of that caring, maybe not all of the caring, there I go, like that's exactly the thing, like some of her motivation turns out to be like very sinister, where she's so attached to this version of Mima, perhaps like in a maternal way, that she can't deal with it, she can't deal with losing the pop idol Mima, to the point where she's so incapable of losing this that she like becomes it. Like she can't deal with it not being in the world, so she becomes it herself, and becomes Mima. So there's like all of these different elements of like personality and identity and being too, and the characters around her, which creates this really interesting depth. So at the end, when you find out the twist that it's this person, like I remember being like, oh, like it's almost like a little bit, it's a little bit sad. Like it's a great twist, but it's also just like, oh wow, she really didn't have anybody in her life then who was really looking out for her. Like the one person who was doing it in like the worst, most violent way. Um, I forgot where I originally jumped off with that thought. I'm sorry. But it's just like so oh yeah, it's so interesting how even like the villains and side characters are given humanity and personality and like their own space. It's not just like Mima's world and everybody's in it. It's this whole tapestry of people grappling with things in their own way.
Yeah, I think the characters are really well done, and um, yeah, they're complex and like, yeah, I think it's handled in a way that's different from a lot of the films of this genre that I've seen. Um, Yeah, so I thought it's like I've said, I'd like to watch it again, but a lot of that stuff with the manager at the end, I didn't fully grasp, but until I read it on like when I was reading the plot synopsis. But yeah, I think originally I had thought that it was just some sort of like thing in her head that was happening. I didn't even understand that the manager was actually, taking out all of these killings. So yeah, I would definitely like to rewatch it for sure.
Yeah, it gets a little fuzzy and confusing, and that's part of like what makes it all so what makes it work so well for me is that you can go into it expecting one thing and you're going to get another, most likely, unless you've had it spoiled for you before. Um, but yeah, so like the kind of outline is just to I gave a kind of intro synopsis before, but essentially the way it plays out is Mima's manager, as I mentioned, is like not able to cope with her moving on from pop stardom into a new career. And so she's like trying to be there and protect her, but she's still encouraging. So she's like there with her when she's at her first shoot and stuff. Um, but it eventually gets to the point where like we find out that she's the one who created the Mima's Room website, and she has also create she's so obsessed that she created an exact replica of Mima's apartment that is like Mima's room. And so when the story starts to get like very surreal, it you wouldn't know it the first time you're watching it because it's hard to piece together until you finish the movie. But the manager was like sometimes taking her to her apartment and sometimes taking her to like Mima's apartment. And you kind of see that with like the fish are alive in one place and dead in another. And like she wakes up in one place and there's like bloody clothes, but like she wasn't the one, even though she had this dream. And so you kind of almost start to put together that like maybe she was like drugged or something where like she has bits and pieces of these memories even though she wasn't really there. And so it just adds to her own disassociation of trying to grapple with leaving behind this past persona, which is like very much solidified in like images and her fan base, and people are like telling her who Mima the pop idol is, to where like it creates this whole like image. And so she has like this version of herself that was true to who she is, and she's trying to break away from that even as it's holding on to her. So it's like she has her own break going on in her head, and then like the actual thing that's happening in her life where like this other person is like doing these things to her just kind of exacerbates that break to where she really doesn't know what's real anymore. And then the manager, throughout all of this, is committing murders as she sees fit to protect Mima. So like after the rape scene, she like kills the person who wrote the scene, and then she kills like somebody who was involved in the scene. So it's like she's doing it in a way that she thinks is protecting Mima's image, but it's actually creating like all of these problems. So it gets very like wobbly and it's hard to understand, but like yeah, that's kind of essentially what happens. Is it's all the manager all along. She's like weaponizing the stalker and like has these crazy replicas going on. But yeah, so it's just like so good because it's like this whole thing where when you rewatch it, you see it and you're like, oh shit. And then it comes together and you're like, oh shit. But the first time you're just like, what? Oh. And so it's like it's very affecting, but like the fact that even on a fourth rewatch, I still find like so much gravity in that. I think speaks to like what a good story it is. But yeah, I did just want to like give that quick overview because we kind of talked about how it doesn't really make sense. So before anybody else has to go open up the wiki, that's what happens.
Yeah, I didn't
But
really
then,
pick up on some of the like stuff about her replicating the apartment and all of that. So yeah,
yeah,
there was definitely some stuff that was going over my head for sure.
well, that's kind of the way it goes. But then, like, even with that, like, even after Mima finds out and is like attacked and chased and like 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 the manager's trying to kill her. Like even when she's like bleeding in the street and her manager is about to die, she jumps in the road and like pushes her out of the way. So like at all times it's like so human. Like even when the villain is like shown to be irredeemable, like she's still redeemed. And I think that's like so great, or maybe not redeemed, but she's still like saved and given value, and she ends up like in a psych ward living her life as Nima. But she's still like she's not just made out to be like some character with a knife. Like it's very, very humanized, despite being an animated film. Like for me at times, like I knew it was animated, but like I wasn't viewing it that way. I was just like, Mima, what are you gonna do? Yeah.
Yeah, with a lot of animated films, I feel like that. Like I don't like, I'm not like thinking the whole time about it being animated, unless it's something just completely abstract or something. But
Yeah, or if they're like really wanting to push that part of it, which sometimes happens, where it's just
mhm,
like very like fanfare. Like Paprika's kind of like that, where it like pushes the boundaries at all times and like is constantly reminding you that it's not real. But this one is very much more playing with that line of reality and the surreal.
mhm, yeah, it's definitely a movie I think I need to watch again. I
You should.
watched it. I like the horror elements. I watched it on Shudder.
Yeah, me
But
too.
I think it's, but I wouldn't necessarily even think of it as a straightforward horror film. But like, but it is interesting that it has some of those vibes in there.
It does get bloody. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of killing. Like when there's murder, like when these violent things happen, like they show it. I mean, it's not edited for kids. I mean, the rape scene is obviously done in a more tasteful way where like you don't really see a lot of stuff, but like there's a section in the film where they show her just getting nude shots. Like you see like her whole body, like she's naked. So it's like a very mature film. It's not so like the horror elements are like very real. They're very visceral. It's like blood on the wall, like gash, 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 gash. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, that's part of where it reminded me of a Giallo a little bit.
yeah.
But yeah,
That's
I
true.
yeah, I enjoyed it, for sure. And I'm just kind of looking at my notes to see if there's anything else.
Yeah.
Um,
I honestly feel like I could do a commentary on this movie at this point. I love this movie because as I'm thinking, I'm like, oh, there are all these like little individual scenes, but it's kind of hard to like tie them together into one full thought. But
you,
yeah.
you
Oh,
should do
but
a
did you have a
commentary.
note? Huh?
I said you should do a commentary.
Maybe I will.
Yeah, I don't think I have any other notes really, but did you have any other thoughts on the movie, just like in general?
Yeah. So a couple other things, just since I just brought it up, like, I thought the nude photo shoot part was really interesting, and this whole idea of like if she's changing her image. So there's a lot of commentary on like image as a celebrity figure too, and just in general, where I think it's so interesting that like for the first part of the film she's trying to break away from this pop idol image, and as she's doing that you see like how it was liberating in some ways and confining in others, where it's just like you look at it and they're like in these frilly outfits and like they're cute. So I'm not going to take that away, but it's still just like this very kind of like innocent, young, like very sugary kind of like attitude and way of portraying herself. And then in order to separate her from that, the people like the industry um the, the way that it's done is that she's made into an extremely mature figure, and I thought that was so interesting that like um obviously as you age you go through like different changes, and like you know as a woman, yes, you are like the way that you perceive yourself and the way that other people perceive you changes drastically after you leave adolescence, and it becomes something that's much more focused on sexual elements. And so there is like that obvious thing that's just like regardless of what culture you're in, that's going to be true. But like the fact that it's pushed to such an extreme here, I think is interesting. So like she's made to do this rape scene, and in that she's like the rape scene is where she in the TV series she's acting in the movie. I had to think that through for a second. She plays uh like a dancer, and she's in like an outfit and people are like cheering and throwing dollars and stuff at her, and then she's basically swarmed by them. And but like before that she's like in an outfit that's like very revealing, you can like see her chest and everything. And then a little while later, it's like a scene or two later, she's shown doing this full nude magazine shoot basically. So like she's laying in bed and posing, and it's very like soft and sultry, and it's very sexy, and like even the person taking pictures is like shown like sweating and like very like turned on by it, and it's like really gross. Like it's hard to watch this and not feel grossed out by it, but then it's like that's what happens, like that's real, that's true. And it's like really hard to kind of like, I don't know, because it's like you see it happen in life, right? Like we all have favorite actors or actresses and we've watched them kind of grow in their career, and like there's this shift happens and you're like, oh, suddenly you're doing sex scenes in all your movies, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. It's more just like the way that in order to mature in like society's perspective, you have to basically shift into this other way of being. And she doesn't like, and then you see like the fans feedback of that, where at first like everybody's behind her and they're cheering for her and they're like, we'll miss you as a pop idol, but like you can do this and stuff. And then slowly her fans are like, oh, she's, you know, we don't really like her as much anymore, and they all just kind of move on. um and then there's like the internal battle she has too, where like, I mean, it's I can't like speak for like every woman's experience, but it is like a very real thing where it's just like you start having these experiences and you start to perceive yourself very differently. So like in her mind, like the broken off part of her identity that's a pop idol starts referring to like her real self as a filthy woman, or that she's like tainted. And so there's like this whole element of it too. And so it's like it's such a multi-layered story where it's like, for me in this screening I was really like feeling and relating to Mima and like what she's going through, whereas perhaps like the first or second time I watched it I was more focused on like who's the killer, oh that was a great like blood splatter shot. And it's like it's all valuable, but like for me it was like much more that depth that struck me. And I think it's just I was trying to think of another example because I feel like there is one. But yeah, those things just really stand out to me as being such a sharp criticism and a smart and well done criticism of this industry, while still being like empathetic to the fact that people want to be involved in this. Like she's doing it because she wants to be an actress, but the problem is that there's all of these really harmful situations and expectations put on her without any thought for her well-being. um, and it becomes violent.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Yeah.
thought yeah, I think it's really well done in that like regard. Some of the violence I wasn't expecting so much, but I guess I just wasn't expecting like how sort of graphic it gets, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really good. I mean, I would give it a 4 out of 5.
Nice.
Part of it I would definitely like to I mean, I've said that like a bunch of times, but I feel like I need to rewatch it to grasp it, or not to like I mean, I got a grasp on what happens, but just to like kind of more fully absorb it. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I would definitely like to do that.
Did you
Um,
watch it in Japanese or English?
I watched the Japanese dub.
Nice. Yeah.
Hmm.
I feel like I feel like it's best to watch things in Japanese or like the original dub whenever you can, whether it's Japanese animation or anything else. But I feel like especially in films like this, you get a little bit more from that original voice acting.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I thought it was good, like the dub specifically. Yeah, I've not. I mean, I think with sometimes with like English dubs, it can sometimes work with animated films because I feel like it can kind of just mesh with it. If it's done well, like in a Ghibli movie, they have a lot of good dubs. Um,
That's true.
but like I've seen some live action, like Squid Game had like a horrendous dub.
Mm.
Yeah, stuff like that. I mean, I would definitely rather watch the original language, and like pretty much 100% of the time. The only time I was really interested in the Ghibli stuff was just because I mean the dubs of the Ghibli stuff were because they have like big name stars voicing some of the actors or some of the
Yeah,
characters. I mean,
they put a lot of thought into it. Like sometimes I remember watching some stuff where it's like in the show they're very clearly eating like a rice ball, and then in the English dub they're like these donuts are delicious, and you're like what? So it's like for that reason I'm like always try to seek out the original because you never know. Like that's a comedic example, but like you never really know like what is kind of being missed. Um, but yeah, I'm glad you really enjoyed it. I hope you do find the spark to watch it again at some point and it lands with you hopefully just as well if not better. But I really appreciate you giving this a chance because I know it's outside of your normal wheelhouse, and I just think that's so great to stretch yourself, and you
no
ended up
problem. I've
enjoying
wanted to
it
see it.
too.
Yeah, I've been wanting to see it for a while. So yeah, I was definitely open to watching it. Uh, what would you give out of 5? I'm assuming a 5, but
Yeah, I've given it a 5 every time I've logged it, so I'll give it a 5 one more time. I almost was about to be cheeky and say a 6 out of 5, but maybe on the next rewatch, maybe
mhm.
on the sixth watch, I'll give it a 6 out of 5.
Yeah, that's awesome. One more little small thing is I just thought it was
Yeah,
interesting that it's like only like 81 minutes long, so they fit a lot into a very short runtime.
yeah, they make the best of that time, and it doesn't feel like it's funny because sometimes long films sometimes long films can feel really short or short films can feel really long, and this is one of those where it's like it is 81 minutes and it doesn't overstay its welcome, but like you said, it fits in so much and uses its runtime so well that you like for me if you just asked me how long is this film, I'd probably be like an hour 40. Like it doesn't feel like you should be able to put that much story into 80 minutes, but they
Yeah.
they did it. So yeah, it's not dense necessarily, but it's very well used time.
Yeah, for sure.
Would
Yeah.
recommend.
Yeah, same here. But yeah, thanks again for being here.
Yeah,
And
thanks so much for having me. Maybe we can do a reprise at some point if you watch it again, or let's just watch more animated stuff. I always love to chat about it.
yeah, I'm definitely open to all kinds of animated stuff. That'd be good to do in the future for sure.
Great. Yeah,
Yeah.
well, thanks so much for the time, Drew. I'll look forward to next one.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.